Just give me 1 second. I'll just change that. You know what? Actually, sorry. I'm gonna come back in. That's how they should make it. Oh, that's really fast. Amazing. Should I promote these people too? Yeah, if you're catching any of the, I don't know if I can actually, so never mind. Oh, no, the calls you should be able to. Is it working or not? No. Did you just promote me to a panelist or a co-host also? No, you were correct. Okay. Let me share screen. Yes. Can someone online give me a little thumbs up if you can hear us in the room? Thank you. Okay, we have quorum. So exciting. So let's get started. Welcome to our July Pedestrian Transit Advisory Committee meeting. Do we have an acting secretary for the week? Anybody who's taking minutes?
Yeah, this is Ted. I'm taking minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Ted. Welcome back from vacation.
Thanks.
So let's start with our roll call. Let me just quick see if we have any guests today, because if we don't, then I don't need to go through my spiel. Awesome. I think it's all just members today, so that makes things a little easier, but we do love guests. So I'm gonna start with roll call. Ted Alexander.
Here.
Ginny Alverson. Did you see Ginny? Ginny is here, but I don't know if she can unmute. Caroline Bodiger. Meredith Brown. Laura Evans.
Here.
Christopher Ferry.
Here.
Tim Gilman.
Here.
Preston Gutelius.
Here.
Satoko Hirai will not be able to make it tonight. Brenda Marvin. Here. Steve Mulder.
Here.
Barbara Myers.
Here.
Bianca Norkunis cannot make it tonight. Vitor Pamplona.
Here.
Zach Rosenberg. Alessandra Snyder, myself. Robert Stanzel.
Rob.
You got it. You can change it right now. And Carol Bugaris. Who I did not see. And for ex officio, the honorable, I don't know if he's honorable, but Willem Baugh, who's not here. Kate White. Yeah. And Justin Schreiber, who is not here. Do we still not have any guests? I see one guest online. Tara, I'm gonna ask you to, or I'm gonna allow you to talk just so you can introduce yourself really quickly. So you should see a unmute option on your screen. Can you just, tell us your name and what ward you live in and what brought you to the meeting tonight?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Tara Mahdi. I'm here to learn more about the discussions on Elm Street parking pilot, those stuff in Somerville.
Awesome. We're very glad to have you. If at any
Thanks.
point you want to chime in on any topics, please just feel free to use the Zoom function to raise your hand and we can get you in.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course. Cool. So, let's get started with approving our June minutes. Thank you, Tim, for taking them. Are there any requested changes to the minutes? Seeing none, I motion to approve them. Do I have a second?
Second. This is Ginny. I second.
Thank you, Jenny. Glad to have you back.
Thanks.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, beautiful. On to subcommittee updates. Did policy and enforcement meet this month? I'm assuming no, since Meredith is not here.
No.
Great. How about engineering and evaluation?
No.
Great. Education and engagement also did not meet. We moved around our meeting to July 25th. So if anybody's interested in attending that one, you're more than welcome to. I think we're gonna do it at 7:30. But Ted and I have to check in to confirm that. But I did want to tell everybody that we have another upcoming tabling opportunity on August 10th. It's going to be at the Union Square Farmers Market. So just, right in front of the Independent, very close by. It's going to be from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So Ted and I will send out a reminder email to folks. If anybody's interested in tabling, then we can get together a group of folks. If you want to sign up for like 1 hour, 2 hour shifts, like totally up to you. But it should be a really fun time, and we'll be tabling with mobility as we normally do. So yeah. I think that moves us right along to our first real agenda item, which is a discussion of our draft letter on the Elm Street parking pilot. So Kate was kind enough to update us on or introduce us to the proposed pilot for the Elm Street parking regulation changes last month. And Vitor led the charge on writing a letter kind of with our opinions on the pilot. Oh, good. I see a lot of people are in the letter. That's awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Do you mind if I share my screen, Kate? And we can look at the letter together. Vitor, would you mind maybe just walking us through the letter and kind of what you have here?
Sure. So we did meet, 4 of us, was Zach, Preston, Laura, and myself. I think the main sticking point throughout the meeting was this idea that even if you change the parking permits and the regulations around them, we still believe people will double park and kind of like ignore the entire pilot or make the pilot a failure and not really give us any data to go on to the next thing. So the main concern we had was just trying to find ways to narrow the driving lane using just low-cost materials or materials that the city can use in this short-term project, just in the pilot. So we went back and forth with many of those ideas. Hopefully that's written down in the text for them to at least consider that this could be a big problem for the pilot. The second part was on the incentives and what a policy on just allowing more cars to drop in and pick up the people, food and deliveries on and off the neighborhood would imply. And we do believe this would incentivize more cars in the road, which is not necessarily bad. We just need to make sure they are, it's appropriate to what we all want to see over there. And it potentially increases the ease of work for the business in the square. So there are pros and cons to the pilot. We had a line back in the letter that simply say, we would like to see other parklets and other infrastructure for other modes of transportation, specifically parking for bikes and some parklets for pedestrians, maybe some benches around, to help not only decrease or narrow the lane, but also help delineate the lane and use that as an excuse to not only investigate cars, but also pedestrians and bikers coming into the square. So kind of trying to solve in a broader way than just a car problem. The points are highlighted in the letter. We talked a lot about how to clarify the driving lane, how to make sure, even if we say we just paint the ground, that cars can't just go around it, because if there is a way to go around it, it's likely that they will just double park anyway. So, trying to think about ideas on how to do that correctly. We do think signage and educational materials for the pilots, explaining to people that this is temporary, that, we might not keep it like that for forever, might just ease both businesses and maybe residents into experimenting with the pilot, as well as this idea of improving the signage to help people understand if they can and cannot use the loading zones as defined today. We do believe there is a lot of people that are just driving around that they don't know if they can use. So it would be nice to see very large signs that indicate if they can and cannot use for each one of the modalities, delivery, pickup, and all the food apps, all the truck driving activities, and so on. And I think lastly, we had a point on daylighting and trying to make sure the crosswalks are free from any problems, both from cars, but also from bikers and other movement in the square. So we try to move away from parking large trucks close to the crosswalk, just for daylighting improvements overall when people are crossing the street. And I think that's pretty much it. We're very much looking forward to see the results of the pilot. That we think collecting data is extremely important. So we will see, how well we can do that and how well we can learn from this process, and hopefully figure out something that is different than, I think, anything else in the city right now. And hopefully it drives us forward in a nice way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vitor. Anybody else who was involved in the writing of the letter, want to chime in, with any additional thoughts? Okay, awesome. How about the rest of the committee? What are your thoughts on the letter? Do we think it captures all of the things that you were thinking about last month as we got introduced to the pilot? Are there things you would like to see added? Yeah, open discussion.
I'm having a hard time remembering all the details from the pilot from last month, but was the pilot written with 2 lanes of traffic on Elm Street in mind?
No.
It wasn't, okay. Yeah.
But the thing is, it seems like it's wide enough for 2 lanes, and so people use it that way anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
But with this really challenging, with the parklets in, it makes it easier to delineate, and we had PTAC markings before that indicate 1 lane. So it's technically not 2, but the
Right.
width makes it feel like.
I was very surprised when you said that last time.
Yeah.
I went on, I'm on a Google Street View for that part of Elm Street, and it's from November 2020, and it has all the markings on it. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is clearly the lane, and the parking section is a little larger, which is good for, especially for loading zones for trucks and stuff. So I feel like doing something like that again, if it's something that the city would be willing to do, because it's a pilot, maybe it wouldn't be, but that seems like a big win.
I hadn't considered it earlier, but having extra width near the handicap parking spots is also could be pretty crucial for exiting and entering vehicles. So it could be, it's not as simple in many cases.
Mhm.
I do just wanna, I think this is a great addition to the pilot. I do want to express support for like the outline that you gave us, Kate. Because I think it's really smart to increase the amount of short-term parking on Elm Street more so than there already is. I mean, that seems like the hugest use of the street right now. While maintaining like a few spots for metered parking, just in recognition that like there are a few businesses that could benefit from like 2-hour parking, for example. I think my one, I don't know if it's possible for this pilot, but like for the future, I would love to see like the bus stop actually be like the length of the bus at some point. Because, you know, it doesn't seem like a huge deal for like the tail of the bus to kind of be hanging off the curb. But, you know, it does limit visibility to a certain extent for pedestrians. So just like in an ideal world, we'd love to just see it like aligned with the curb. And then a question, is the parking, or what is it, the safety stick, will that be in usage during the pilot as well?
It is operational for as long as we want it there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we also have some new locations, but it's outside of the Elm discussion. Too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw someone putting one up in, further down.
Holland Street.
Yeah,
Where on Holland?
it's like by the bus lane.
Yeah.
Right in front of, Life Alive,
Mhm.
Life Alive.
So it was,
Is that the only other one that's going in?
At this time, we put in new locations on Holland Street for the bus lane and the bus stop right outside the station, so Dick Square Station, right in Dick Square. It is not the only location. We haven't determined where others are, but right now, we're prioritizing locations where we have data that shows it's blocked more frequently, which is primarily through parking tickets. We know that's not the perfect data point, but it's one that we can kind of build off of. And happy to bring that back if that's of interest. Another time.
I think I would like to maybe just open up the, like the image of the pilot that you gave us last week, Kate. Just to make sure that like there's nothing that we're forgetting in this discussion, before we, you know, maybe take a vote on the letter.
I just bear with me one moment, sorry, because I have many tabs open today. So I can bring the presentation really fast.
Thank you, Kate.
No, my apologies for not having it ready. Okay, here we go. Would you like me to show the pilot proposal?
Yes, please.
Okay, and folks who are joining hybrid, I'm just gonna share my screen in just one moment. Can you all see that okay?
This is, maybe a bit of an aside, but has the city ever looked at like temporary bus, stop bump outs or bus stop extensions? I think I've seen in Cambridge, maybe this was during the pandemic, but they had, I think it was like plastic, like sidewalk extensions essentially for bus stops, and then they later paved some. And is that something you've ever considered?
Yeah, and so, just to kind of capture what you described, using kind of like what we would call quick build materials, which are, there's some products. One we looked at a lot is one made by, if you're familiar with Zikla. Zikla, you might have seen, they sometimes have products that are called armadillos, but they, there's a really good example in Chelsea that was done outside of a community center where you can extend the sidewalk so it stays the same height using really sturdy kind of plastic, and they're modular. So just like how Legos, you can connect them, you can use the blocks, and they've been able to use it for an MBTA project in Chelsea. I forget the specific route, but if you actually look at the Chelsea Flower bus stop, you can see an example of the sidewalk extension. In terms of our consideration, we definitely have but haven't determined if this is the location that we would try it at this time. And just the timeline of implementation would change. Just to procure the products.
Any other thoughts on our stance? After being reminded of.
Maybe, so is the city planning to strike the single lane again?
We're actually just really excited to hear what you would say. And it's definitely on the table. We're determining of when. And actually, if I could ask a question, would you do that at the same time as regulation changes? Do you think anything makes sense to stagger? If there's anything you want to prioritize, that's helpful for us to hear too. The only limitation is that when the parklets are in, the actual like machine you need to paint the line can't be done.
Can the plastic bollards be installed when there's the parklets are there?
Mainly because the parklets aren't in a location, we've looked at placement of flex posts, especially near the crosswalks. Or near kind of where there's the no parking area in front of the burn. And there's no parklet kind of constraints with those locations. But we could consider flex posts along that line. Last time we used some other things, other barriers. When we expanded it kind of for the emergency in the pandemic.
I'm just thinking about if we saw that the utilization for the loading zones was not that high, or not that high at certain times, it would possibly make the street look very wide. So maybe striping it or even applying a treatment to the parking area. To make it feel not as wide open.
Can you remind us of the timeline for this, Kate, and at what point the parklets would be taken down?
At this time, parklets are allowed to be in seed or allowed to be, I believe, until November 30th. So it's up to the it's primarily businesses that put them in. And it's up to them when they decide to take them out. As well as that some they may have a license, but may not have installed yet. So there's still some that could be, the November 30th is when it would be removed. And given that we're now kind of in the middle of that, we would wait probably to do line markings if it was the delineator line.
And how about for the pilot itself?
To like change the regulations.
Yeah.
That's really, it's really, up to when we feel we've got the support. I think we're excited to hear from you all. We've also done on the ground engagement. There's definitely kind of more concern when we're talking to some of the businesses. And I think it's fair, right? There's a ton of different needs on the street and it's very small, 2 blocks.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that question of like staggering or priorities or timing?
I think as far as breaking habits for current drivers that are parking, having both changes occur at the same time could kind of be like, oh, I need to drive differently in this area, rather than have it slowly changing and learning how to double park differently. Yeah, but it seems like there's some restrictions with how well you can align those.
You can also use some of the diagonal parking, like on Union Square. You just occupy more of the street, like just get more busier than the opening space we have today.
So we did look at that as a possibility. It is actually not the same width, even though it's so wide. If you stagger the parking, you may be able to do it on one side, but you wouldn't be able to do it on both. I don't have those exact measurements, but Adam Polinsky is senior planner on our team, sat down and measured it and it wouldn't work. I'll also just say we were concerned that by creating more parking, the long-term goal for Elm Street, which PTAC discussed, I believe, about 6 months ago or more, is to actually pedestrianize it. So we'd be concerned about swaying one way to then take more away later. But we don't have a schedule for when Elm will be pedestrianized.
Something we discussed in call is trying to see if the H Mart wants to put a parklet for their opening. Because they need something big over there.
So this is Ted. Just for the minutes, can I ask who was speaking just there before Mitar?
Before me,
I think it might have been Preston.
yeah.
Preston? Okay, great. I just didn't catch everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. I'm not hearing much more discussion. So it sounds like there are a few additional things that we should add to the letter, which I see, Vitor, that you've already commented on in the letter draft, so thank you. I think the only other thing would be the timing that Preston mentioned. I personally completely agree with him. So I motion that with the changes that we've talked about today, we send this letter to Mobility as soon as Vitor is ready with a final draft. Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
I,
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Yet another letter. So our next discussion or agenda item is on the latest proposed designs for Tough Street. This is a project that we've been talking about as a committee for, I feel like almost a year now.
Yeah.
So new members, this is kind of the second round of designs for Tough Street? Third round of designs.
Oh, sorry, yes, it was 2 concept alternatives, 1 concept, more developed concept, and this is the third kind of.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we've been engaging on the designs throughout the whole process. And this is our next chance to do so. So Kate's gonna give an overview of the project and also the latest designs and kind of what sort of feedback has gone into shaping those latest round of designs.
Hey everyone, I'm just sharing my screen really fast. And just bear with me one moment. It also looks like I'm about to lose battery. But maybe Alessandra, would you mind doing me a favor and kind of give a bit of background about what you remember for our previous conversations, maybe?
Yeah, totally. So Tough Street, for those who aren't familiar, which I don't blame you if you are not, because it's a pretty small street in the grand scheme of things in Somerville. But it is in East Somerville, between Cross Street and Washington Street, very close to the East Somerville T station. And it's also a really critical corridor for people who live in East Somerville to actually get to the T station, to Washington Street and the bike lane on it, and to the community path. So the hope is to make safety changes on Tough Street to make it a lot easier to traverse and safer and friendlier for pedestrians and cyclists and all the like. Previous conversations that we've had about the designs are, strong support for the concept and for the changes that Mobility is proposing. I think we are excited to see a lot of curb extensions and raised crosswalks and additional crossings and wider sidewalks for sure, reconstructed sidewalks. They are an absolute mess right now, so it would be great to get them reconstructed. But it'll also tie into the neighborways that are about to go in on Glen Street and Otis Street. So it's a really exciting opportunity to kind of create a multimodal network in the area. I think those are kind of the big broad strokes
Yeah,
that I
thank you.
remember.
Thank you so much. That is a great opening. So everyone, if you got the chance, we shared some of the materials that go through this background. And so today I'm gonna focus primarily on the design. But if you're interested, I just wanna walk you through, as Alessandra described, where Tough Street is located. And some of the reasoning for us is, as you described, the degradation of the actual pavement, but again, the priority of creating a safe connection for folks accessing the station to the new community path crossing, and again, really investing in accessible sidewalks, particularly in East Somerville.
Kate, would you mind minimizing the videos? I'm happy to keep an eye on them, but just so folks in the room can see the slides.
Yeah. Perfect. So as Alexander described, we began this process about a year ago. We've gone through a couple iterations and we're now at the stage of, we call it our 80% designs. This is kind of where we're near final and moving towards finalizing those designs to prepare for construction. But we wanted to bring it back out to folks to see, you know, did we capture what you had talked to us about and met the goals of the project, which is really to dramatically increase safety and truly construct a neighborway. And neighborways are designated in the bicycle network plan. Really are supposed to be very low volume streets. So even though this is in the bicycle network plan, there's a co-benefits of just reducing speeds and the amount of vehicles on the street to make it a more comfortable place to be, especially when you're walking or rolling. There are components in neighborways that include more shade coverage, right? So that you can have more comfort on the street, art can be included. It's really a place for people and less about vehicles. We've got some standards. These are drawn from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO. I think we talked about that a little bit in the past, but it's a really helpful guide for urban planners to look at really kind of making sustainable safe streets. We've designated these in a lot of our areas that either are perpendicular to those long kind of like main streets or run parallel. So the perpendicular is a lot because of the lack of north-south connections we have in the city. But as well as the parallel, right? There's folks who might feel really comfortable being on Broadway and biking, but there's some who might feel much more comfortable. I'm picking on one that's existing, it's a Hudson Street, which kind of parallels Highland. So there's lots in this presentation. I hope you please take the time, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to pull back to the slides. We try to do a lot of due diligence in understanding the needs of the street. So we looked at operations. We had a concept design in the fall, which is we did a full yield street, which we aim to narrow it to 12 feet wide with dedicated pullover spaces to really calm speeds. We did some testing on that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. If you're interested in hearing what we heard, we produced a couple of community engagement reports on the different phases where we talked to folks, as well as PTAC hosted a walk dedicated specifically to Tough Street to gather input and to learn more. But feel free to check that out. I'm going to focus specifically on the pedestrian components of the feedback. As Alessandra described, crossings were like the thing we heard about the most. There was some about in the concept, folks really liked the new crossings across Tufts at Glen Street and Dell Street, because there are none existing now, and that they would be raised as raised intersections. Folks talked a lot about the Glen one specifically too, because you can access the Capilano. It's always that nice for residents, but there's a high amount of folks traveling with young children. There was a lot of excitement around the raised crosswalks, especially across Cross Street. And then around the crossings for Washington and Knowlton, there was a lot more of we can configure it a bit different. There are some curb extensions, but what does that look like for bike movements? And just sometimes the kind of, how do you make it easier? Specifically Knowlton is at a very, it's at a very kind of like, trying to think of that angle. I don't know how best to describe it. We can look at a map again, but that whole three kind of streets approaching each other makes it really challenging. And there's another component. We had a lot of support for trees and green space to make the walking experience more pleasant. There is also a special designated Audubon site or Mass Audubon at a residence here. That is one of the first that is both a hair salon and a protected area for birds.
We met him on our walk.
Yeah, fun fact about Tough Street. And then there's just a desire for art. There's that large white building And again, just make the space more for people. And just lots of support for traffic calming. So if you're interested, please dig into this. I think one of the things that came up in the yield condition too, were that if dedicated pullovers, you know, how do they function? What does that look like? And just still some desire for some parking options. So we did some testing we did a small demonstration on November 14th, where we tried to make that yield condition using traffic cones. And use some video message boards to indicate the change. And so the gaps are where you would have those pullover spaces, and the fire department joined us to test both the tower truck and the regular truck. It was really cool to test it, and some things we really learned were that the pullover spaces need to be much longer. And I mentioned that now, that informs obviously the design we're about to come through. And especially to account for things like folks maybe illegally parking in the pullover spaces, when really that can cause that gridlock. And folks aren't able to pass. Especially at the intersection of Washington and Tufts, where we just saw more traffic turning onto the street. We also just needed to account for people like driver behavior. And as we all know, some folks might be more aggressive, or some might be more accommodating and yielding. And then if you're interested, we did some parking utilization. So really, those were all kind of questions that came up in the first round. I wanted to do that due diligence in between. So what is the updated design? Just reminding folks, there are kind of three main goals, along with, you know, really constructing a neighborhood. It was safety, accessibility, and comfort. If you can see this on your screen, if you prefer a larger version, there's also just a full street rendering available in those links that I sent you all. But I'm just going to walk us through kind of from the north to the south side of the street. Overall, we went for a wider Tufts Street. It's not wider than it is now, but wider than the concept. So this would be approximately 20 feet, about 10 feet travel lanes, which is very standard in the city, unless you're on a main street, which would be more your 11-foot wides or maybe a bit wider. We proposed pinch points, which are where you either expand, you can expand the sidewalk into the roadway to narrow it. So you kind of, that's the term, kind of pinching the street. And there we put it for 12 feet wide. This would allow one vehicle to pass and still enough room, you know, maybe for 12 feet is just enough space so that you're not kind of really squeezed up against the curb. We use this opportunity with the pinch points to create more landscaped area, and also allowed us to have a larger, a larger sidewalk space for full clearance of using it. So, you know, in your sidewalk, you have your clearance space for folks to walk and roll, and then you might have your furnishing zone on the sidewalk, which includes your trees, your utility poles. There were some utility poles kind of located directly in the middle of the sidewalk as it exists now. And as it can be quite challenging to move these utility poles as they're not infrastructure owned by the city, we looked at ways to create that wider sidewalk feel, create new landscaped areas that kind of accommodated around that. That also includes your fire hydrants or any street lights. Going from the north side, we kept raised crosswalks across Cross Street as you meet Tufts Street. And then we expanded the curbs on Tufts Street, right on those north sides, and that to really tighten up the curve, because folks will come down Cross Street and kind of whip to the right onto Tufts Street off of the bridge because of that slope. And we also have opportunities to kind of to really make the grading more accessible by bumping it out. As you'll see, there's a landscaped area now proposed abutting the big building that's right there at the intersection. To travel down, we created a raised intersection at Dell Street. We used kind of some of the bump outs to create new parking options. And I'll walk through kind of the regulations of those in a moment. A raised intersection at Glen Street with the contraflow bike lane approaching Tufts Street to match the new Glen Street quick build neighborway, which allows for two-way biking on both one-way sections of Glen Street. There is many new proposed trees on the street. Just want to note, and we can get a little bit more into that too, there are a lot of trees that are not in good health. So the aim is to not only replace those, but with species that have much more longevity in the city. And our arborists walked through and kind of identified all of those. in addition to a curb extension on, by a tree on Knowlton Street, which also matched, we bumped up the curb there to make that crossing a lot more narrow and more kind of like, kind of perpendicular, so it's much more of a square rather than that awkward triangle. But the curb extension also allowed us to protect and create a larger tree well for the tree there and still have that large clearance pass, as there's not an accessible sidewalk right there. I'm gonna walk through some more close-ups. One thing I forgot to mention is we now proposed a wall mural, and that actually might be painted very soon. We're anticipating mid-August. So that will come before the construction, but it was really to answer the needs, as well as we got really cool support of artists in the area who are gonna participate in that. Yeah, I think I spoke through most. I just wanna highlight, so for some of the folks who weren't in the conversation back in October, on the southern end of Tufts Street is where it meets Washington Street, which we heard a significant amount of feedback. It wasn't technically in the project limit, but the MBTA committed to installing a floating bus stop for, you know, for the Route 86 that travels, which is designated as a high frequency route in bus network redesign. But they also propose a new crosswalk. And if you're familiar with the intersection, kind of more east on Washington Street, the crosswalk is kind of located away from Tufts Street. So if you're traveling from Tufts Street, you have to take a left, walk down Washington a little bit, then take a right across to then come back towards the station. They're now going to move that crosswalk as close as we can. There's a driveway that prohibits us putting it right at the cross or right at Tufts Street, but that will be now moved closer to the station and narrowed with the floating bus stop. So maybe I'll pause. Oh, I'll just walk through a couple of other components, and again, happy to answer any questions. I'm focusing on the pedestrian transit examples, but happy to talk through any of the bike facilities as well. Just will note in terms of biking, you'll notice there's purple pavement markings. These are real. We aim to paint purple neighborway markings to help indicate that this is a neighborway. This will match purple signage that is part of the Quick Build project. And fun fact, it'll be our first bike icons that we specifically picked ones that look like women biking, as many don't. Just want to highlight, we're just really excited about that. So you're very familiar with raised crosswalks, but you know, we try to go through and walk through the different elements that are being proposed. This is we had a couple precedents of pinch points. There are some that can be used, you purely can install more greenery, or you expand it for sidewalks. So, and right now we're looking to add more greenery that supports what has just been proposed in the pollinator action plan. There's some more information about the neighborhood treatments. And then around the parking, we are proposing loading zones during the daytime, as there's still just a lot of delivery needs. And some of the community members shared, it was less about sometimes full-time parking, but being able to pull over, unload your groceries, bring your kid inside, without having to park away, and then bring all of that back. And then the real desire was for overnight parking. So our proposal is to then have it be resident permit required after. But we haven't determined the times, and that's what we're looking for feedback both in the regulation types, as the times. And then the mural, which is really to highlight kind of like it's really to just be bright and beautiful. There's motifs that highlight the biking aspect, and also a lot about the trees, and birds, again, for the specific Audubon site. And maybe I'll pause there and bring us back to the full rendering, for questions and comments.
This is Ginny. Maybe I shouldn't be so picky here, but it sounds like you're adding a lot of useless eye candy to these streets. Why?
Okay. Ginny, could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean? I'm not quite sure.
Well, trees and things like that, that I guess they're great for people who can see them, but problematic for those of us who can't.
Okay. Well, I mean, so if your question was why, it was something that we heard a lot from community members who live nearby on the street, as just to kind of reduce the heat and create more greenery along the stretch. And so that was the motivation for including them, along with meeting some of the city's goals to increase our kind of overall tree canopy. But thank you very much for sharing that feedback.
One thing that comes to my mind is, I do a lot of cycling, and with the bump outs, the pinch points, I tend to stay as far right when I'm cycling as possible to stay out of the traffic. But then with the bump outs, I feel like I've got to kind of look over my shoulder and make sure no one's coming, and then, navigate around them. Just because I still find a lot of drivers are on the lookout, looking for cyclists who are like running alongside of them. So and I don't know how many streets we've done this on. I don't come across the pinch points that much just cycling around the city right now.
No, it's not something that we have really explored in other street reconstructions.
But again, it's supposed to be low traffic, so I
Yeah.
understand, it's not like there's 30 cars going down every, 2 minutes, but it's just something that strikes my
Yeah.
mind.
Kate, I'm curious, maybe you covered this and I missed it, and if that's the case, then I apologize, but, like the previous design, was a more meandering concept, like you mentioned. And I personally liked the pinch points better in the original, like dual concept design. So I'm not upset to see this at all, but I'm just curious, like, why you chose to pivot towards the like second concept design option more so. Like, it still looks there's a little bit of chicaning happening in the design, but just curious why the pinch points ended up in this version of the design.
Yeah, we were excited about both, and it ultimately had gone with the meandering. But with the volume that Tufts is seeing at the moment, it was kind of that, would it cause too much? Was it too much at this time? And so how could we create the traffic calming, answer what we've been hearing about the concerns, but create just a little bit more consistency for people? And so that's why we ultimately kind of pulled back on the yield condition, the full yield. Even though we found that there are many kind of yield conditions in the city, but it's more created by parking rather than kind of, specific infrastructure. And so we went for the street pinch points, just to create that traffic calming. Yeah. And to just, because it's also a designated fire route, they were also a little bit worried about, would cars still yield to them coming through?
Gotcha.
Did the MBTA also participate in the test?
Yes, they did. They sent many 90 buses, which was also, as we all know, a little uncommon for the 90. But we actually had no problem with the larger infrastructure during the test. It was when someone might choose to not yield or illegally parked in the pullover, then not allowing space. But we've been talking a lot with the MBTA, and ultimately their aim is to have the 90 not be routed on Tufts Street.
Oh, okay.
And kind of use a more consistent corridor, and a lot of it is actually to do with the challenges presented by Cross Street.
Yeah.
So this is Jenny. Let me understand a little bit here. Are you talking about eliminating that bus stop that used to be across the Stop and Shop parking lot?
Oh, we're talking about Tufts Street. Are you talking about Broadway near Stop and Shop?
Yes.
Okay, no, right now I'm just totally talking about Tufts Street.
Okay.
Are you thinking about the bus stop that Kate was mentioning on Washington Street, Jenny?
Yeah, actually I think it did intersect. I think it actually was Washington Street rather than Broadway. And it's been a while since I've used that bus stop. And when I did, I had a guide dog.
I don't think there's a Stop and Shop in that area, unless I'm completely
The
mistaken.
one I'm thinking of is the one on, like near McGrath.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, I don't know of any of changes there at this time. Right now, I'm talking about the Route 90 on Tufts Street. and the bus stop that serves the 86 right at Washington and Tuff Street.
Zach, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, I just, was just gonna say that I like the inclusion of the benches in the design. I think it's a much in the future streetscape. Do we understand the rules of the road in the sense of, is that a priority for now north or southbound vehicles? Like who gets to stop when, like, are those things defined or just like when they meet each other, they have to figure out?
If they're not defined,
They're not defined.
yeah, it's just based on how they approach.
And I guess the same for bikes. So if a car meets a biker, who gets to stop and they need to negotiate again?
Mhm. That's how we've seen it in operation, kind of in some other examples.
Yeah, I guess my concern with the bike is actually when you're moving in the same direction as the car, rather than when you're coming from the other side. And just making sure that the car sees you and that the cyclist knows to slow down or. Yeah, so it's more same direction than opposite, that's what I was thinking about.
And how many parking pullover spaces are gonna be created in this?
3 total spaces, when it's in just loading zone, that could also fit a longer vehicle on the one between Glen Street and Knowlton Street, so that's approximately 40 feet long.
Might be stating the obvious, but that's just from my understanding, you're actually like, you're adding a few spaces, like there was no parking in the street, or there was currently no parking in the street.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, since 2018, it was initially removed when Greenland was being constructed and then made more permanent. And then, so this would be to request that some would be, or put back in.
yeah. Cool. Yeah, definitely, I have the same concerns you were expressing about like the bike and car thing, and like wondering if like you could have pinch points, but also have there be like a pass through and a pinch point for like cyclists somehow. I don't know if that's even possible. And I also like obviously trust that this sort of design has happened in the past. You've done research and that like this proves to not be as much of an issue as maybe we are seeing it upon first look, but definitely something that sticks out to me as somebody who does bike a lot. And I don't know if it's possible to have like a pinch point that also will let a cyclist bike through, but yeah, that's something that I'm thinking about looking at this. And the road has to be 2 ways, right, for cars, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, given the need for emergency routing.
Right,
We wanted to maintain 2-way travel.
totally, that makes sense.
Do we have an updated timeline for the bus stop and crosswalk improvements that the MBTA is planning on doing?
The MBTA is still saying in 2024.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Great.
I apologize for being late. Are you saying parking areas are like overnight parking or for loading only?
For overnight residential parking and then short-term parking in the day is what we're proposing.
The loading concerns me just because of the tendency for loading vehicles to park poorly and more into the street, which will make an even worse pinch point for both cars and bikes.
Yeah.
That's a very good dispute.
The street is residential, right? And there aren't any businesses on Tuff Street or?
There's actually a few, approximately 3. There's some that have like addresses in the 60 Tuff Street, the large building right in the corner across, but there's a business right on Cross and Tufts. And then there's the gym, right near, kind of like in between Glen and Dell Street.
Okay,
And they have an off-street lot.
okay.
For the parking, is it just those two spots marked D on one of the maps?
Yeah, and I think in the full rendering, we labeled them with letters, but I'm gonna pull them up. Between Dell and Glen Street, there is, the pinch point is kind of the length of it's about 20 feet, the length of a parking space. And then between Glen and Knowlton, it's about 40 feet, so like the two vehicles could fit, or maybe a UPS truck. You know, your more kind of box truck.
And, okay, so that's envisioned with having like a textured pavement or something to help indicate that it's a parking area separate from everything else.
That's what we're proposing. And then it might even be slightly raised, so using curbing to kind of create, you know, you're not quite at street level.
I like that that could turn into, if no one's parked there because it's a loading zone, that turns into a pinch area that a bike could ride through if they needed to, if no one's parked. Well, the one between Glen and Knowlton, I guess the other one has trees on both sides. But yeah, it could make another area for like to detour.
Any other thoughts, questions, anything you would like Kate to go more into detail on in the presentation that she did?
For the bits, to get around the utility poles where there will be landscaping, will there be some sort of textured surface or something to kind of act as guiding for people with limited, vision to walk around?
Yeah, we were envisioning, we've been talking through a couple different options, but we're thinking of, especially where it might be right in a path of, you know, like where you're pivoting around a path of travel is curving.
Okay.
So you have much more of a kind of surface that you hit. Or not hit, right, but you can,
Defined, you can
yeah,
find it.
but that's what we're hoping to tease out as we kind of finalize up the drawings.
So for pedestrians, the west side is not a straight line, right? Walking through the street, like the bottom side.
Yes,
Can we add some signage or maybe tactile placements just to make sure people know that it's curving, that the sidewalk's curving?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to ask already.
Because I think Jenny can't see it, but it's very curvy on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And we just need to find a way to tell that out loud.
Mhm.
Some way to make that obvious to those of us who can't see that.
Yeah.
Though the other side is a straight line, so at least that, you know, it's a little safer, I guess.
And there still aren't plans for the lot on the west side of Tuss Street, like right next to Washington Street, right? That kind of like empty lot right now.
That's true, to that's my knowledge, there's no plans.
Okay.
It's, yeah.
Is that owned by the city or?
It is not owned by the city. There was some space used, for the MBTA during the construction.
Yeah.
But I don't recall off the top of my head where, 50 Tuff Street, the large building, where that parcel ends.
Would it, if the curviness is a problem, would it make sense to move the landscape areas closer to the road rather than having them like along the, buildings that are on the sidewalk?
Yeah, I'll definitely bring that comment back to the team. As you can see, so, in the plans, we try to indicate where the utility poles, and they've really presented a challenge of having clearance for the sidewalk. And so we tried to be strategic in using landscaped areas that then kind of encompass some of that utility pole and don't take away from the sidewalk clearance space. But it's really helpful feedback, right, to think through what indicates that for people traveling on the sidewalk.
There are three utility poles also still in the middle of the sidewalk, kind of. They might need some additional help there as well.
Yeah.
Can plans to move those utility poles be put into place even if it can't be done in this period as a request to the utilities that own them?
It's something that we're in constant conversation with Eversource about just utility poles in general, and we just weren't confident that we would be able to relocate those in the time frame that would work for the construction.
Okay, it'd be nice just to have a, you know, a footnote in the plans to say, this is where the poles are, but you know, if Eversource gets around to moving them when that happens, this is where they are planned to be moved to, and you know, here's ancillary activities that would go with that.
Yeah. I think we have a challenge of even getting to that point of where they could be relocated. But I mean, it's something that we continue to be in dialogue with them.
So Kate, I'm sorry, were you gonna say something else?
This may be a little off topic, but what is the threshold at which you can ask or strongly request the utilities to vary? Utilities?
It's a great question. We do not have a threshold. And actually varying utilities is, the cost of it is often on the municipality. But in strong coordination with the utility, obviously, because it's their infrastructure and then they have to be able to repair it. So those types of projects often, they're extremely expensive. And would be a very large capital project, then we would have to use different funding. We'd have to move into the capital improvement plan. And it would probably be work that would be done many years from now.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up. I mean, when I wonder sometimes when I'm walking around, what caused a certain street like Highland to have varying utilities and then others not?
Yeah.
There's no good general rule for that.
No, there's not, and there's very few, right? It's like Highland, Somerville Ave, and Broadway, and they're just very long stretches. It doesn't mean that all the maintenance, you know, you might know more protection from the elements, but all that maintenance must be done below. And it's just something that, in terms of how we spend the city funds, it's really hard to potentially bury the utilities, and then that means not doing a bunch of other work.
So just in general, it's not a very feasible option in most
At
cases.
this time, it's very challenging, just in the kind of funding. Doesn't mean it's not off the table, just right now with the kind of pros and cons of available funds.
Thank you.
Yeah, we should have some better answers. It's really tricky with the resources.
A completely, you know, off the wall idea, but has anybody ever looked at the idea of, instead of putting poles in the right of way, having Eversource or the city pay a nominal fee to people who have the buildings there and have it connected to the buildings?
You know, I'm not sure. But I can definitely ask engineering.
There's probably a reason it can't be done, but you know, just a thought.
So, Kate, what is most helpful to you from us at this point? It sounds like we, you know, have some, you know, questions and concerns, but perhaps not anything substantial enough to like merit a full letter. So I'm curious if it would be, if we should try to come up with more content for a letter that would be helpful to you, or just try to summarize like what we've said tonight. It seems like you've been taking notes. Just what's most helpful for you at this point from us?
Yeah, our biggest goal was to come back and, you know, in the previous comment letter, answer some of those questions, and then also to check in and see, does the proposal match the goals for a neighborhood, right? And just in any reconstruction project, our aim is to really meet our Vision Zero commitments. So the conversation's been incredibly helpful for us. I think if, PTAC chooses not to create a comment letter, what I would do is just take all of the notes from this, and it also refer to the meeting minutes and incorporate that in the community engagement recording. And if there are any kind of outstanding questions, probably respond to those, which I could probably do in a follow-up meeting. So at this time, we've received what we need to kind of move forward in the design, but are happy to have more time if you need.
Great. How do folks feel about that forward? Ruby. And then remind us when we can expect the next updated design?
Yeah, so it would be the final design. I'm just gonna take us back to the timeline. We are currently in July until about mid-August, we're reflecting feedback on this updated design. Then through till October, we're gonna work to finalize those design drawings and prepare for construction, which would mean we take that final design, we go out to bid for contractors, they bid on the project, and then once we have all of that confirmed, construction could take place between April of 2025 through to November of 2026. But we'll have a better idea once the contractor's on board when construction might start. But we're gonna pull it all together, then kind of communicate out to everyone who's been involved in the project, as well as to any, kind of follow all of our standard communications, to notify folks about the final design, and then kind of keep folks up to date on the project website around when construction begins. And then our construction communications team will step in around all the construction communications.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The last section of our meeting tonight is really just open time for questions and discussion. We don't always do this, just as a disclaimer, but we had just some extra time after we picked the first two agenda items and figured we're still like new enough in our round of new members that it might still be useful to just kind of have an opportunity for open conversation. So, if you have any, but also new and old members can bring up anything they would like. So if you have questions about the onboarding materials or, anything that you have been seeing in the city that you think we should take on at some point, goals for the rest of the year, et cetera, et cetera. Now the opportunity. Yes, Christopher.
Just one of the things I'd noticed around the city was it looks like the MBTA has gone in and put in a lot of wayfaring signs, particularly on the community path. I was kind of surprised to see those showing up and not having heard of it on our end. I fully support them, but is that part of a larger area-wide program? I don't know if mobility has any information about those signs going in. Has anybody else seen them, or is it just me?
Thanks, Christopher. I, at this moment, don't have that, but I'll bring that back to my team tomorrow, and I'm happy to report back on it.
What do they look like?
They're relatively large signs that are along the community path saying distance to the usually next T station. And then they're color coded either green or red. And in some cases they're on streets near the path or at near intersections and sort of, point to go this way for, Gilman is a quarter mile in that direction and Davis is X, amount, and they have not just distances, but expected travel times on bike and on foot. Much like the neighborhood path wayfinding that went in a few years ago, but a different sort of iconography. A few of them a little bit confused me because around Magoon they point away from Davis, but they're pointing to where the entrance to the bike path is. So I was like, is that? Yeah, I guess that's right. So
That's really helpful feedback, Christopher. Thank you.
Do we want to talk about the Gilman Square part?
What do you want to talk about with it?
How disappointing it is again?
Why is it disappointing?
I don't know, I had my hopes up. I think the way they did it is just way too hot, because of the, pavement and so on, so. I wanna say it was a good try, but I'm not sure if it's achieving anything. People are there, they're trying to use, but I don't know, it feels very rough. I think the question is like, would we do something like this again, if we had another opportunity?
But that wasn't a city sponsored thing, right? That was just Roger House.
It's in collaboration. It's, our economic development department's been working on that. So happy to kind of bring in more information if folks are interested. It's in partnership with a local, group called Culture House, who works on a bunch of different placemaking projects. You might have seen them in Union Square where they did a pop-up inside a building right on the plaza. And they were part of the Glen Street neighborhood project too.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what their expectations for foot traffic were, and if they actually measured, what did they meet their expectations or did they exceed them, and what the sort of threshold for doing these sorts of things is. At what point do they break even on their efforts, and did we meet it? Did we not meet it? And any lessons learned? I know I was in that space recently. I was just again thinking of a new building in that space with a municipal escalator heading up to the high school, but that's me.
Has anybody else been to the hospital?
It was very hot. I did a yoga class there and the teacher was like, oh, don't worry, it'll be shade soon. And I look up at the banners that they have there and the sun's moving in the other direction. No. So it's very hot. I'll definitely second. It's the shading there is not. They really need more of like the overhead triangles or something to kind of make it more comfortable for something that's primarily a summer space. It's not very inviting during a lot of our weather.
Either that or they need lots of ice cream. It's an idea.
But it was a nice idea. Just too hot.
If that is something that, Chris, you mentioned a couple of different questions. If that is a topic, I'd be happy to talk with the team and sure we could kind of iron out when that could occur. But if that is something that we would like to talk more about.
If it's within our scope, it's sort of on the edge of the pedestrian and transit. It's connected to the bike path and connected to development and such things, but it might be in somebody else's purview more than ours. I don't know.
Anyway, I'm happy to facilitate.
I'll put it on our list of potential agenda items.
One thing that I've been curious on that's floated in my mind a couple times recently, has the city ever tried, so there's a lot of people that, for whatever reason, either during the pandemic or previously, have stopped using their driveways as driveways, and there's still a curb cut. Has the city ever looked to do like, hey, we'll take rid of your curb cut for you, and here's like a 1-year tax incentive or something, and then it's just gone, because that makes the sidewalk so much better for everyone.
No, we haven't explored that, but I'm happy to bring that back to the team. I think there are, as we roll out streets, like when we're reconstructing a street, we cannot eliminate a driveway, like we cannot eliminate a curb cut. There's opportunity sometimes if, let's say, if there's too wide and there's safety issues, then we go in dialogue with the landowner. But where there are curb cuts, we
Right.
maintain those.
So not to like force it being taken away, but
Yeah.
like an opportunity to be like, hey, if you want a tax incentive, we'll get rid of your curb cut for you when a road's being redone or resurfaced. Because there's people that just never use their driveway and it's there. And every fewer curb cut on a road surface makes it better to walk on. One less person that you're one less driveway to be looking at, like, is someone gonna pull out?
Traffic and parking, when I once called complaining about people parking in front of my driveway, said that the curb cut for the driveway is there, needs to be there for wheelchair access as well, so there might be another reason to not close them for that. That's what traffic and parking told me several years
I
ago.
mean, there are also plenty of buildings that just don't have any, like, any curb cut in front of them in some neighborhoods.
I'm sorry, I called to see if I could park in front of my house, there was a different call for traffic and parking. And they said, no, because you're blocking wheelchair access then, so they said they considered it a right for wheelchair users to have driveway, use the driveway, so I'm conflating two calls.
No, don't worry, that's really helpful feedback, thank you for sharing. I'm not as
And-
familiar with. Oh, sorry, Crystal.
At Art Beat in the Pollinator Alley, there was a group that was doing depaving. And so that might be a group that's worth touching base with about curb cuts. If they're going and literally demolishing driveways and turning them into lawn or garden or something, they might have a listing of places where there are zombie curb cuts. Or, you know, they could coordinate with the city. I know they're getting volunteers to actually smash up the pavement and do hauling things out and repaving, so. But that's a place where a landowner is clearly choosing not to use a driveway anymore and converting it into something else, so. I forget the name of the particular group, it was depave something.
I want to share one example. We had a location on Washington Street, which is currently in construction, that when there was a development done, they didn't narrow the curb cut, but created a much narrower driveway. So in that time, we did kind of narrow up that curb cut where, Chris, I like your term of zombie curb cuts. I would kind of say that's a location of them where now that will be standard sidewalk. As the curb cut wasn't useful because it just went right into a building. But so there's some opportunities we've seen that in older cases, but in newer developments, they might get rid of that curb cut.
Yeah, just on icy days, every curb cut is can be a challenge to pedestrians.
Especially on like the narrower sidewalks where just the grade can be so significant.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other thoughts, questions, topics? Things you've seen around that you're curious about?
I have go for it. Selfish question. Do you know the timeline on the raised crossing for Cameron Ave
Oh, yeah, this year.
this year?
Yeah. Sorry, for everyone, this is the raised intersections planned for Cameron and Tannery Brook Road and Seven Pines. There's no crosswalk by this time. We anticipate construction to be completed this year. If you're familiar with the work being done on Mallet and Liberty Ave, it's the same contractor crew, so they'll move to those locations following that work.
This is Ted. I had a question about the participatory budgeting results from last year. I don't know, Kate, if you know the status of those, because there were a couple that included, bus stop improvements and shade, which is what made me think about it, since we're just talking about the need for shade in some places. I'm just curious if there's a status update on those.
That's a great question, Ted. I don't have all of that information today, but if that's of interest, I'd be happy to do a dedicated agenda item if that works.
Yeah, I mean, it could even be just a quick status update, just kind of curious what happened with the results there.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I imagine given the lead time, the data square improvements that have been made over the last 6 months or so, those probably were discussed in PTAC. Anyway, they're generally great. We walk almost every day down there. I would say there's a timing issue out there. The right turns that are made onto College
From Highland.
are, I don't know how much it is of cars who are just, I gotta get through, and they kind of break the red, the yellow and red. Or if the timing is just too tight,
Yeah,
but there's often 2 or 3 cars still making those right turns, even when the crosswalk signal across College says go.
yeah,
So you'll see some conflict.
yeah.
So that is my hot button for you to be, okay,
No, thanks, Rob. It's something that,
you already know about it.
well, we've also been observing and trying to determine, can we add more time here? Where does that take off? We are seeing a lot of the behavior happen after it's turned red, which is really challenging. So, yeah, our, both mobility and engineering, we're trying to figure out how do we tweak the signal time. I don't know if we can resolve it soon, but that is something that we've definitely observed, and thanks for sharing it.
Cute.
I'm curious, I totally agree. I run there all the time and, yeah, I'm always frustrated with what's happening there. But I'm curious if others have like spent time in Davis and like have other thoughts on the signal timings that have changed. I know we talked about it a while back and kind of wanted to return to it at some point. So, you know, just kind of while we're on the subject, if anybody has thoughts, feels like.
I mean, I know they've done all kinds of signs to tell people about which lane is going which way, but it still seems like you get people in that right lane coming down Highland who want to go straight and get confused when it's green for the right turn, but not for straight. And that backs up traffic and you'll get a, you know, a cacophony of honks, and then they have to take a right turn when they didn't want to. And, yeah. Also, bike traffic from the community path straight through Davis continues to be a problem that going through Statue Park, I've seen increasingly number of bicyclists who aren't dismounting and walking. And I've heard people on the path, you know, just in passing, talking that Davis is the worst connection on that through path now in terms of being able to understand when the bike path dumps you off in one end, how to get to the other side, or not being wrapped up in traffic. I think there was a proposal for paint to sort of make people go around Statue Park. And I don't know if anything ever came of that. The main plaza there.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up on that. I think there's been a couple of different iterations over the years of kind of potential proposals. But I would bring back more information on that.
Yeah, somebody had mentioned, you know, other places where bike paths were much more clearly designated through complex intersections. Like up in Malden where the North Shore path has a lot of paint and a lot of wayfaring to go through a complex intersection, but it's clear where you should be going if you're on a bike. It's not true in Davis at this point, and we're getting, since the extension has gone in, we're getting more through bikers. It used to be that it was only more local traffic from Davis to Cedar and then from Davis to Lowell. But now, since it's a throughway into the city, which is great, we get more people who are, you know, not necessarily as local.
I was just gonna bring up the, like the crossing of Webster Ave and Prospect Street that is near Inman. And I guess my comment is actually more of a driver comment, because I see so many almost collisions there. Like that's an intersection I walk through all the time. Like people just seem willing to take a tremendous risk when they're on Prospect trying to take a left onto Webster. And it just seems dangerous in general, you know, less so if you're walking, but if you're on a bike, it could also be a big problem, I think. And I don't know if the city has thought about making any changes there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Next one, like brush up on all of our projects. So if anyone's familiar, a couple years ago, the city embarked on a project called the Union Square Plaza and Streetscape. And we kind of came up with a proposal for an area that covered kind of up Prospect Hill, kind of through to Somerville Ave at Bow, all the way to Webster Prospect and kind of to the edge of Prospect, Somerville Ave and Washington Street. And Webster Prospect reconfiguration is one of the, I believe it's the first phase of the 4-phase Plaza and Streetscape project, which in that project also kind of reconfigures that central part of Union Square, and expands the plaza. So we've got some preliminary designs for that, but no schedule on when those will be implemented. But it's our aim is to have that be the first component of when that whole capital project rolls out.
I just, every time I walk through, I see something
Yeah.
crazy, so.
Yeah. It's like Prospect has incredibly high volume and
Yeah.
it's such an awkward configuration.
Yeah.
Like doing the kind of cross arms, but that all of the different approaches and then like even like the one way away on Concord, we know some people travel the wrong direction up.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's many components and we're looking at kind of signal timing as well as redesign.
mhm.
Can we just have a public comment? You have 5 minutes left in the meeting.
Please, yes, absolutely.
I'm here, I'm Elizabeth Areden. I sent an email that I don't know anything about the, pedestrian bicycle collision that I was a pedestrian in, a week ago on Wednesday. I'm 58 years old. I am a bike rider. And I'm here just to express my deep concern about the area not in front of in front of the Gilman Square T, which is where my particular incident happened. And I would say I consider myself fortunate that I don't have concussion and that I don't have documents. I was idiot. The biker who hit me did not even yell before he hit me. So I had no idea. And I was honestly, it was in the middle of the Gilman Square T stop. And I was trying to help some people in front of us. And I certainly hold some responsibility, but I didn't look for that, but I thought I was in front of it. So I feel incredibly fortunate, but I also just, since last week, I'm a cellist, I can't play cello. There's a whole host of things that I won't go into. My biggest concern is that over the past week, I've had a multitude of conversations with people, all of them expressing their deep concern about the speed with which bicyclists go through that area. And there's no clarity around expectation of bicycle behavior around T stops, at any of our T stops. And I think we're waiting for an accident to happen. Another accident, and one that's much more serious. I'm in pretty good shape, and maybe that's why I didn't get injured as much as I probably would have and should have, given how hard I was hit and how hard I slammed on the ground. My husband, who works in the city, has almost been hit by bike twice, at the intersection of School Street and the bike path, where there's the fence and then the stop sign, and there's that curve, and bikers do not stop. And so but that whole area just really needs some thoughtful consideration in terms of signage, in terms of painting. Because it's incredibly dangerous. And there are people coming out of the T who don't know it's a bike path, who don't know where they're going. And honestly, even the people who I was trying to help were standing, in an area that was pretty much the path. And it's really confusing. I think it's probably confusing if the other spots that go on the speed. And I think it's preventable, and it's something that can be done fast. We don't need a ton of planning. We need paint. And also a real clarity around, the community path is a community path. It is not a dedicated bike lane. And as we protect our dedicated bike lanes, we do everything we can and have traffic calming places when we need to do that. I think it's really appropriate to start having a conversation about this is bicycle calming, like in areas where there are multiple constituents using the pathway, some of whom are just not going to pay attention to everything that bikers and drivers sometimes assume. So I'm just here to plead that we don't spend 6 months thinking about how to paint it, let's do something. Yeah, if I could add to what Elizabeth said, to Christopher's point about through riders. In a younger life, I was a through rider. out before the bike path even was really a bike path out to Lexington, Concord and beyond Stowe. And there are always through riders that think they're God's gift to bicyclists and aren't gonna listen to anything. But even out further on the bike path, there have always been run-ins with pedestrians and bicyclists. But I noticed just last week out with my family going out to Lexington, that there's a lot of signage out in Arlington, Lexington that didn't used to be there many years ago that I did it before kids. A lot of signage about lowering your bike light, just being mindful of the crossings, and we definitely need some of that in Somerville because, even more than out in Lexington and Concord, this is a multi-use path, and it should be, people should be trained, the through riders need to be trained as a former and hopefully future through rider.
Yeah, that North Shore bike path that goes up through Malden and into Lynn is actually signed with a speed limit. They have a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit on it. And I just recently learned that the e-bikes that Blue Bikes are putting out is actually has a speed governor on it. It doesn't go above 18. So there are definitely people, both human powered and electric, who are doing faster than that on the paths in some places. So, and if that's, I mean, if we've talked about 20 is plenty for cars, I mean, cars have much more mass, so they're going to do more damage. But yeah, it's even just posting a speed limit. Most people don't have a speedometer on their car, on their bike, but it might, you know, just put the idea in people's heads.
Or maybe even just a sign that says like slow zone, you know, just so people do slow down. Because like you were saying, I have no idea how fast I'm going on my bike, but I'm pretty out of shape, so it's not that fast.
I have a thought on that. So, you know, there's the normal like traffic for car signs that'll flash like, hey, here's your number, you're above the speed limit. There's no reason those don't work for bikes. I've seen them triggered on some streets when I'm riding. Like, there probably is a bike dedicated version of that that could be put in like slow speed areas. Or saying like, go below 10 or something like that. And then it would remind riders coming into an area that they should slow down if they're in excess of that dangerous speed for a high traffic area.
And even, you know, some markers further back. And I think there are some yield signs, but, you know, pavement markers on the path to let people know that they're coming up on Gilman, on Magoon, on maybe not on Magoon, on East Somerville, especially those two that they do have the T stations coming right onto the path like that.
Who controls the actual border of the intersection on the Gilman Street side? Is it the city or is it the MBTA?
So he's saying,
Where this happened
yeah,
was at the Gilman Street.
it was right by the
station.
stairs.
It was
right?
right, but it was like between the stairs
and the
station entrance,
Yeah.
like I was looking at the station entrance.
Yeah,
Which is why I just sort of.
on the path.
On path, which
Yeah.
is why I was just like, it never occurred to me that I could be
Yeah,
thrown into the air. So like,
yeah,
so I'm surprised it hasn't happened with all the high schoolers crossing, because that's the stairway to the high school.
yeah.
I'm wondering if there could be, flashing lights or a sign, some kind of sensor that does bright lights at the oncoming bicyclists, so if people are coming out of Gilman Station specifically. I don't know who controls that, it's the MTA.
Those are all great questions, and maybe I could just answer kind of the first, Elizabeth, thank you for sharing your story, and that's, I've taken a minute.
Please.
As soon as we read your story, our team actually gathered and said, what are the options? We have been looking at, there's kind of some of the examples that you just described, installing lights and stuff like that can take a bit of time, and so we're looking at what are more short-term options. It obviously is an issue that, you know, yours was specific by the station, but we also can been your sentiment that some of these things could happen in so many other parts of the path, and so we really want to think of this as kind of a comprehensive look. We know that does impact timeline, and it is really hard, and so just want to be real, like, we want to do something immediate. We're trying to also figure out what the options could be, and then kind of when we can implement that. Pavement markings and signage are obviously the easiest to install. But we are looking at things of, is there actually specific traffic calming, like physical installations? Especially on the stretches, you know, one of our concerns was, you know, when you enter at Walnut, you kind of go down a slope and there's a really long stretch that there's no breaks. So we don't have a plan yet, but it's something that is very much on our mind and we're just trying to figure out what it could look like. I actually just wanted to maybe request a PTAC with some of the examples. Chris, you mentioned Lynn, and I think you also said Malden. We looked at the ones that were on the Esplanade. I think they were installed last year, kind of around where there's a lot more kind of like conflicts. You know, Neighborhood Design actually did some evaluations, so we could look at, see what their success rates were, but they used the word look and like big painted lines to, as, you know, kind of like when you see sometimes approaching a speed hump. I think New Jersey does a lot. You paint the lines before you hit the speed hump. We keep people on our toes. There's also in Inman, the yield to pedestrians that are marked out in the bike lanes. So I wonder if actually be a really fruitful conversation around like the pedestrian safety component of like shared use paths and like what are. So I wonder if that could be a topic. That's something that too, we could start to think through precedents, but we don't have it as a project yet, but it's something that we really identified. So geez, we've seen tremendous growth of usage on the path since it's been open in the last year.
Yeah, and I know we wanted to, like, we haven't had a conversation around path plans since like it first opened with Viola. So I think that's something that the committee would certainly be interested in revisiting. And, you know, I think we've heard so many comments that are very reflective of your experience, even if folks thankfully did not have your experience. But, you know, I've heard so many stories from friends and other community members where like they don't feel safe being on the path because they are pedestrians and they feel like it's been designed just for cyclists, which like I'm a pedestrian, I'm a cyclist, like I use the path for both, but I think it other work I think has to be done to make it very clear that it is a shared use path. And so I very much appreciate you bringing your story today.
Yeah.
Just gonna put it on my future agenda.
And thank you for joining today. Just so anyone knows and always remembers, these are always welcome for anyone to join. So please, if you want, please continue to come back and when we specifically talk about this topic. Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to, what we can do to prevent something again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm just so sorry. Like we all, sorry. Speaking for the city, we were just really sad to hear that.
Well, I think that brings us to an end of our meeting today. So thank you everybody who joined, our members and our guests. We have some packed plans for our August agenda, so get excited. And then just a reminder that we're gonna have a little gathering next Monday at 6 p.m. at Remnant. So, you know, I guess folks who are listening, if you're a guest, you can also show up, but it'll mostly be for PTAC members to meet and get to know one another a little bit better. So looking forward to seeing you all there. And thank you for joining tonight.
Thanks. Thank you.